I was sitting in my dorm room when I first got a call. I didn't know it was a call at first. I didn't know that God was pushing me towards this. In fact, I laughed when I read the email that said, hey, there's this really cool opportunity to go out and serve as a youth pastor in Hawaii. I laughed and then I turned to my roommate and I said, hey, I could go out to Hawaii and be a youth pastor for a school year. Wouldn't that be fun? And we both laughed at the idea. But little did I know that that was the first moment that God planted the seed in my heart that would eventually grow into a call that would change my life. I fought him at first. There were many things that I wanted to get done with school first. That was my thing. I wanted to get in and out as quick as possible. Taking a year off was not in my agenda. That was not in my plans. But God kept nurturing this seed, watering this seed, and through many different kinds of circumstances, all of a sudden I found myself on a plane going out to Hawaii. And that was one of the best years of my life. I learned practical ministry hands-on. I got to see what it looked like out in the field. And did I make mistakes? Absolutely. Were there times when I was tempted? Absolutely. Were there times when I fell? Absolutely. But the beautiful thing about it is that these times when we make mistakes or when we fall, it doesn't disqualify us from the call that God has put on our lives. Welcome to Sabbath School Short, and this week we're looking at lesson number 6, which is titled The Roots of Abraham. And the memory text for this week is found in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8. This is the hall of faith that we find in the book of Hebrews, and it mentions Abraham. It says this, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. You see, Abraham received a call as well, and this call was, wow, it was a lot, what's the word I'm looking for? It was a lot more challenging for him to accept that call because he didn't know where he was going. There Abraham is. God comes to him and says, I'm going to send you. I want you to go. I want you to leave your life behind you. I want you to go out into a land that you do not know. In fact, you don't even know where you're going. But I want you to trust me, and I want you to follow me, and I want you to go. Man, if I was Abraham, I'd be like, this is crazy. I don't even know which direction I should go. I don't even know where I'm going. No, God, I'm not doing that. That's way too difficult. That's way too hard of a challenge for me just to leave everything behind. My family, my identity, my land, where I grew up. Leave all of that and just go somewhere you want me to go? That doesn't make any sense. And there's another layer to this that the lesson actually brings out in Sunday's lesson, which is titled Abram's Departure. And the quote that really jumped out at me, it says, yet God's call to go involves even more. The Hebrew phrase, lech lecha, go, translated literally means go yourself or go for yourself. Abram's departure from Babylon concerns more than his environment or even his family. The Hebrew phrase suggests an emphasis on himself. Abram has to leave himself. Abram has to leave himself to get rid of the part of himself that contains his Babylonian past. You see, Abram was living in Babylonia at the time, and God calls him out, and this Hebrew phrase almost suggests this idea that he has to leave himself behind. Quite the call that God puts on his life. You know, I think God gives us that same call today when he calls us into a relationship with him. He says, hey, take that old self. Put it away. That old self, in fact, Paul says that old self is crucified with Christ. It doesn't reign in your life anymore, and Jesus reigns on the throne of our hearts. That's the call that Jesus has put on our lives. Deny ourselves and pick up his cross and follow him. And that may sound bad, but the good news is that this is such amazing news, because this old self the Bible talks about that we must forsake, this old thing that Abram had in his life, he had to let go of that in order to accept the new, the better, the great, the amazing. The things that we think are so great in our lives don't even pale in comparison to the goodness that God has in store for us. So don't be afraid to forsake yourself and accept Christ, because what Christ has for you is so much better than you could possibly imagine. Just like Abram's, this land that God called Abram to, was so much better than the land he was living in. And he had to let go of that in order to accept that new. But on his journey, as Abram accepted and he obeyed God and he went on his journey, he encountered temptations, he encountered trials, and many times he fell. In Monday's lesson, it talks about this, the temptation of Egypt. The lesson says, what we see here then is how even a great man of God can make a mistake. And yet, this is the beautiful part, not be forsaken by God. When the New Testament talks about Abraham as an example of salvation by grace, it means just that, grace. Because if it weren't by grace, Abraham, like all of us, would have had no hope. As you accept the call of God in your life to deny yourself and to go on the journey that He has planned out for you, you will make mistakes. You will fall short. That's guaranteed. I cannot stand here and tell you that your life is just going to be fields and roses when you accept Jesus. There's going to be challenges. There's going to be difficulties because we still live in a sin-filled world. But the good news is that your mistakes do not discredit you. Your mistakes do not force you out of the presence of God. Your mistakes do not invoke God to forsake you. Your mistakes do not identify you. Abraham stepped out into the call that God put on his life, and he made mistakes along the way, but he was still the man that God chose, and God still worked with him to bring about the whole nation of Israel. Your descendants will be like the stars, God said when He called Abram. And God has this amazing call on your life to journey with Him, to partner with Him, to go through life together with Him. And don't be afraid of making mistakes. There's so many times when Abraham made mistakes. The lesson brings out more of those things, but there are also many times when Abraham acted in faith. With Lot picking the land, the lesson talks about. And the land that Abram got was from God. A gift from God that he received through faith. The priest with Melchizedek, all of these stories that the lesson talks about that Abram is involved in are painting this story of Abraham living out a life of faith. And that's why our memory text comes from Hebrews, the hall of faith, where Abraham believed and it was credited to him as righteousness. He went and trusted in God. That didn't mean he was perfect, but that meant he was walking with a God who could make everything perfect, even when it looked like a mess. And I want to encourage you today, as you journey and accept the call that Jesus has put on your life, to deny yourself, to accept Him, allow Him to sit upon the throne of your heart. As you accept that call, rest in the fact that it's okay if you make a mistake. But come back to Jesus. Put your faith and trust in His sacrifice for you and know that you are covered by the blood of the Lamb.